Real quick, this car's gone a lot of miles and a lot of years ever since I changed the timing belt. And I mean, I guess previous to that, because of what the other problem was with it, that I've just had no power. And you got no power up hills, you got no power down hills, and you got no power in your accelerator. You got like the first 1/4 inch, and that's all the noticeable power you have when pressing down an accelerator. And everything else you push down was just going in order to engage the transmission to downshift it. So I don't really know how to explain it. Just no power anywhere. And my cruise control is really wonky too. I'd engage it. Sometimes I'd engage it even after my fix on the timing belt fix for the timing. Even after on this last trip, before my alternator went out on me, I was having issues. I'd put the cruise control on, and the car would floor itself. I'd put it on other times, and it would go down halfway, and I wouldn't have any power. I don't know. It's just really hard to explain, but just no power at all in the engine. So some things I want to go over so I don't forget. Like the timing belt, one of the common problems with people replacing their timing belt, and you'll see people mentioning it, and this is what happened to me 150,000 miles ago, was I was a half tooth off. It's like you get your timing belt back on, you're trying to put it back on the pulleys and everything, and then you're a half tooth out of whack. And I had to make a decision on whether or not to go left or right in order to make it sit in correctly, and I went the wrong direction, which ultimately put my crankshaft one tooth at a time, which made everything 15 degrees out of time, or at least down at the crankshaft it was 15 degrees. Then another thing to mark your belt, because I'll mention that, you'll need to get you a Q-tip, cut off the cotton swab end, right, dip it in some paint, and then touch the belt on each side of the tooth, and then touch the tooth, and then you'll have 3 dots, and that way you've got your original position. And of course you do all that on the camshaft pulley, not right there. And then the crankshaft pulley, it's down there, and then it's got on the back side of the pulley, there's a little V notch, right? And then on the timing belt cover, on the lower cover, there's 0, 5, 10, 15 degree marks, and then on over there's a 45 degree mark. What else is there? I guess that's it. If I think about anything else, I'll just say. All right, so, to check your timing. I don't know if a timing light will work. Like you check it and you'd point it down here, and to where you can see little things and light would flash or whatever. But as soon as you start your car, the computer puts it out of time. So I don't really know if a timing light would work on that. And or maybe you can get one of these. I got one of these. It's 15 bucks, and I've had this for years, and it's just awesome. You plug it in and you can see everything that's going on with your engine, but you can also see whether or not it's advancing or retarding the timing, and you can see how much out of how to time it is. So maybe you need one of these with the app in order to see where it's at, and then you go down there with the timing light and make it flash, and then you can see where that's at, and maybe they'll line up. I don't really know. But the way I did it, because everything was already taken apart, because I was changing out my timing belt preventatively this time instead of waiting on it to break. Well, screw it. Let's just get into it. All right, so you jack up your car, take off your tire, right, and then you've got skirting, the plastic skirting that goes around to protect everything. So there's 2 10 millimeters here, and then I believe there's 4. There might be 5 10 millimeters there, and then there's one goes in at the end. In the middle there's like 2 bolts. That'll take that off and expose the crankshaft. You'll need a breaker bar or a ratchet with a cheater bar or whatever. You'll need that, especially if you're doing it alone. You'll have to have an extension on it, because you'll need to use your foot, and a 19 millimeter wrench. And then everything else is 10 millimeter and 14 millimeter. So once you get your tire off and stuff, then you come over here, you'll take off this reservoir, and you need to get your power steering pump out of the way. There's 2 bolts. There's one here and there's one here on this, and that'll loosen up that. And then I didn't do this, but I wish I had, because it was such a pain in the butt and it was so messy. Then you follow this around, and then there's 2 bolts. Whenever you see how hard it is to get to those bolts, you'll understand why I didn't do it. But there's 2 bolts. You take those off, and that'll just lift off and flap out of the way. What I did was I disconnected it here, and I left this here in the way, and then I took zip ties and plastic and whatever, but it was constantly dripping because of gravity, blah blah. This thing, there's air holes in this, so it's always wanting to drip. So you got that out of the way. Then the next thing you need to get out of your way is your engine mount. So there's 3 bolts on the damper right here. There's one here, and then there's one on the other side. You'll get that off, and then your engine mount itself, there's a bolt on this side, there's a nut over on this side. You'll take those off, and then underneath in the middle there's another one. Once you get that off, then your engine is completely disengaged from the car on this side. So you need to have a jack underneath the oil pan. So take a jack, get you a 2x4, and you know, just place it up to the oil pan. Don't lift, just leave it, just place it to it, and that way when you loosen these up, the engine will just fall and sit on top of that jack and it won't sink. So you need to get that out of the way. What's next? All right, so everything's out of the way here. Then you need to start with a 10 millimeter, and there's 4 bolts on the top of the timing cover. So the timing cover, just so you know, it goes up and then it goes around and then it comes back long ways this way. Instead of it going up like this, it actually sits in kind of like this, right? So there's a 10 millimeter here, there's a 10 millimeter down there. Then on this side, where's that? You can kind of see it right down there. There's a 10 millimeter bolt. And then the other one, the last one, is you go on around and on down, and then where the engine mounts are, you sit your hand in. It's like an 1.5 inch recess. You'll sit your hand, put your hand in, and feel around, and you can feel that last bolt. And so you get those off. And once you get those off, that'll explain this. My awesome, you know, artistic drawing here. You got camshaft pulley here, water pump here, your tensioner, and then the spring, right? Then down here, there's a couple more pulleys and stuff, and then you got your crankshaft. Real important that you never let the slack off of the bottom, okay? So you will, well, first let's talk about timing. So you put your crankshaft on top dead center. It takes 4 rotations of your crank in order to turn your cam once. There's a little hole in the sprocket, right? And then on the engine, they took and they stamped a square in there, and they stamped the engine. So you'll need to stick something in that hole in order to find it. Now, top dead center, just letting you know, is go up 90 degrees and then go back about 5 or 10 degrees, and that's where that notch is. So you need this hole to actually be over here. And then when it's there, you should be in good shape. Put your crank on 0, have your hole up here, put your drill bit in, put your drill bit in the hole and press in, and then either use your foot with the cheater bar on the crankshaft, or get you another pair of hands in there so they can spin it. And you'll want to spin it, you know, 10, 15 degrees or whatever each direction, and then you'll find that little notch. When you do, you know your cam's at top dead center, okay? So then once your cam's at top dead center, look at your crank and make sure that that little notch in the pulley is sitting at 0. Mine, from where I was off, I was sitting at 15. So yeah, I screwed myself for a long time. And that's it. Oh, so you'll go and let me swap hands here. You go and you hold your hand here, okay? Before you let off your tensioner, you hold your hand with the belt on the water pump. Don't ever let this move, okay? And you'll also need to be holding it on this side. Another reason to have another person. You'll also need to be holding it on this side because you don't want to let the tension go down here again. So you'll loosen this up. You'll loosen this up, and then you'll take a screwdriver, push down, and then tighten. And that'll hold this pulley down and give you all the slack you need. I had to move and spin the belt this way 1 tooth, which gave me slack here. But so I went, and once I had that, I went and I just ran my hand up the belt, pushing up against, which gave me, you know, slack going around. And then I set my tooth where it needed to be. And then what I do? I went down to the crankshaft, and I spun it clockwise in order to tighten up the crank, or tighten up the slack out of here. I let go of the tensioner, that sprung that back up, and then I put my hand, after I sprung up, I put probably 5 pounds of pressure, and then I tightened that down. I don't know if that's what you're supposed to do or not. That's what I did. And I just got back from a 2,500 mile trip the day after doing my timing belt, and it worked just fine. And then just put everything back together. That increased my power a lot, like I was saying. Did almost everything. I thought my car was fixed, but then on the road, once I got, you know, in the Kansas area, the rolling hills, that's when I realized that my cruise control was still screwing me over and was still causing me to lose power. So luckily, I'm just so glad my alternator busted on me and broke on me, because that made me replace it, and then all of a sudden I had all the power that I needed. So how do you check to see easily if this is the problem? Well, one thing you can do is, you know, you can mess with this bolt right here, you know, unscrew it and screw it back in, try and increase the ground. I put in a ground over there. I put a ground in here. I cleaned the throttle body grounds. I cleaned the ground on the transmission down there, which is, just so you know, it's on top of the transmission right down there, and then it shoots straight over underneath the air box. I took off my coils, I cleaned those contacts, or cleaned those up, and then put them back in so they'd make better contact with the block and get proper grounds. And every single time I messed with the grounds, I also changed these fuses, and oh yeah, don't forget to disconnect your battery first. I also changed those fuses, and every single time I did something, I would get a noticeable increase in power. The problem is it always ended up going back, and then it would, then I'd get my power again, and then it'd go back out, and then I'd get my power again. It just sucked. But at any rate, when I replaced that alternator, it was all fixed. It was all done. So I hope this helps. I hope I hope you don't have to go through what I've had to go through for so many years. And with these old cars, the electronics are getting old, and they just require some extra little things that you got to do in order to get things beefed up. And like the last thing I'm gonna do, because I haven't had to go over any really high mountains like Utah, Colorado, those areas where you get up 14,000, 15,000 feet. When I'd be in those areas, I would always, I would end up going like 40 miles an hour. In second gear, I'd be going up hills, or actually, yeah, second gear, I'd be going up hills just in order to hold myself to be able to creep up a hill. And then I'd top the hill, and I would have to keep it floored, and I still wouldn't be increasing speed. Then I'd be turning off the ignition. I'd be slamming on the accelerator repeatedly. I'd hit the little ECT power transmission button you got. I'd be hitting that. I would, I'd do everything to try and get my power back. And then finally, I would finally end up getting my power back. But it looks like I may have all it fixed, but I'm going to change out my oxygen sensors also, because they're supposed to be changed out every 100,000 miles, and this thing's been 279,000. So it's a little bit due. And I'm thinking, light oxygen up at the top of the mountains, maybe the computer just isn't getting good readouts from the oxygen sensors, and I'm hoping that will, they'll fix those, and then I'll never have that problem again. We'll see. But anyway, what's this? It's 12 minutes long. It's too long. Sorry it's so long. Sorry I rambled so much. But, hopefully this will, get you fixed up. Talk to you later.